Welcome to Out of the Question, a podcast that looks behind some common questions and uncovers the question behind the question while providing real solutions for biblical world and life view. Your host is Andrea Schwartz, a teacher and mentor and founder of the Chalcedon Teacher Training Institute.
Where have all the fathers gone? That's what I'm going to discuss today with my guest, David Williams, a speaker and evangelist whom I met last year at a fundraiser for Real Options Obra Medical Clinics that serve women in the San Francisco Bay Area with unplanned pregnancies. David has a compelling story and a perspective in that he has been on all sides of the fatherhood issue, the good, the bad, and the in-between. David, thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Andrea. Thanks for having me on.
Okay. Now, quite frankly, I had never heard of you before that evening, but you pretty much had me spellbound as you testified not only about your failures, which you did quite transparently, but also the change that Jesus Christ made in your life that helped you restore the function you have as a family. And I'm going to have you get into your story. But before I do, I'd like to ask you, since you spend a good bit of time on this topic speaking before audiences, where have all the fathers gone? And I'm talking about those fathers of aborted children, those fathers who've left the women they impregnated to raise children on their own, and even those fathers who might be physically present, but don't realize how important they are in their children's lives.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Andrea. I think when it comes to especially the issue of unplanned pregnancies and the issue of abortion, I think the way that it has been packaged has made men feel like they're not a part of the equation. So when you think of an unplanned pregnancy and abortion and the rhetoric that goes behind it, it's a woman's choice. It's a woman's reproductive issue. Men typically, it seems like there's no place for them. And, on both sides of the thing, when you think about the pro-choice, it's often that it's the thoughts about the woman, and then pro-life, it's the argument is the thoughts about the child. But the way it's been wrapped is like, where's the man? And the man is very important. The man he's a father of a preborn child, but yet he's not even spoken about. And so I think for men, it can almost give men a pass. It can almost give men a pass to shirk their responsibility, to not step up to what it is that they are now, that they are, and to step into that. And so, I think that happens in the unplanned pregnancy. And then let's say that a woman goes on to have a child. And, I think, oftentimes the thought is like, the man's automatically supposed to step in and be there. And then if he's not, he's a deadbeat. So he got on this one end, he's really not important. But then, once a child is born, he's to be there. And I think for a lot of men, it's left them confused. And I think over the decades and the generations, I think we have, this sense of fatherlessness where we see a lot of, men and girls, boys and girls that are growing up without their dad. So it's almost as if, dad's not needed. We can have family without dad. And then on the back end, I think when it comes to an abortion, we often don't think about the man, but I think the man who is a father of a preborn child, when there's an abortion that happens, there's a loss of fatherhood and there's deep pain that happens to a man's heart. And I think it's hard for men to connect that pain. And I think that pain of going through an abortion can exasperate some of the other pains that have been in a man's life. A lot of men, even myself, may have not, I wasn't physically aborted, but I felt from my relationship with my dad, I was emotionally aborted. And so, a lot of men don't know what it is to be a man, don't feel like they have the capacity to be a man or a father, don't know what that looks like. So I think there's a lot of different dynamics that play into this. Where are the men? When it comes to all phases of pregnancy, children being born, or even when there's an abortion that takes place.
So I have a question that, because you, like I said, have dealt with this, you probably have considered before the advent of movies and television, which quite frankly shape a lot of people's mind on a lot of things because they've seen it depicted, how did men learn how to be fathers? I mean, we had a culture that had intact families. So where did men learn this that somehow or other they don't have access to now?
I think society's changed. I think even with, you look at generations in the past where a lot of stuff was like farming, where a dad had a career and the child may be the apprentice. And so I think there was a lot of learning and interaction that took place in the course of just everyday life. And I think with some of the changes that we have had, and some of them have been good changes, but I think in that, some of that has been lost. And so now, marriage isn't looked at as sacredly as it once was. And so, it's, people are okay with single parent, families, or people going through divorces aren't looked at as bad anymore. So it does leave children where, especially young men growing up, where they don't have that man that's there. And so I think what you said, with the media, whether it's TV, movies, the internet, social media, I think those are a lot of things that now young men they're searching, and they're getting a lot of different messages about what it means to be a man, but there's not really that close personal interaction that there has been. And I think some of the generations that have come before us.
Talk about the idea of a stigma. I remember growing up, if a girl got pregnant, it wasn't announced, it wasn't celebrated, and she would go off and maybe live with her aunt until the pregnancy was completed and the child was put up for adoption. And some people decry such, they say, see, we shouldn't stigmatize people for this. But in some regards, don't you think stigmas serve a good purpose?
I think they can, especially, it's a great question. Because, I think, and this may be going a little off of where we're going, but I think when we think of like where abortion is in our country and just the astounding number of abortions, I think the one thing that we rarely talk about is the fact that there is this design for sex, and sex is designed to be between a man and a woman in a marriage, and marriage becomes the safest place for, the purpose of that is procreation of children, the pleasure that man and woman can have just between the two of them, and even sex being something that protects them in their relationship with one another against other temptations. And so now, there's not stigmas towards, sex outside of marriage. And so I think what that allows is it almost gives a permission, a permissibleness, that this is fine and this is okay. And I think what it leads to is other things down the line, especially when you look at today, if you even look at like numbers of abortion or who's having abortions, 86% of the women that are having abortions today are unmarried women. And so it's like, I think some things that God has designed that we now look at as being archaic and old fashioned were things that he designed for our good. And he designed that would be the best, not just for that man or woman, but it would be the best for any child that would be a part of their union. So I do think there, that some stigmas are good in the sense that stigmas almost help people to realize like this isn't normal. This isn't the way that things should be. Things are supposed to be differently. Now, for us to shun people in that's one thing, but I think we have such a permissibleness in our culture that it's almost like anything goes, and we've kind of sown the wind and we're now reaping the whirlwind as we look at some different aspects of it.
That's true. I think the scripture says over and over again, we're not to move to the ancient boundaries. And there are lots of boundaries not only have been moved, but have been obliterated. In other words, you're not allowed even to talk about boundaries. And people keep wondering how we go from saying, okay, we'll, for example, legitimize that two people of the same sex would want to be married. And so we have to make the mental gymnastic that that's a marriage as opposed to something else. That now I find that most Christians find themselves on the defensive. And so they'll have to put the sentence, I don't hate anybody, but God's word says, well, why do we have to say I don't hate anybody before that? Because the culture has pushed the biblical perspective on the fringes, as opposed to those things that should be on the fringes are now center stage.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think anytime that a nation, a country, codifies things into law, I think people begin to think, that those things are right, even though they may be ethically wrong, morally wrong. It just puts into the thoughts of people that this is legitimate. And so it is sad in our culture where, so many things that we shouldn't have to be on the defensive, because these are things that are contrary to nature and they're contrary to the God who created nature. And, we should be able to just say what God says without putting that there. But I think the laws and generations growing up with thinking that, this is right or wrong. I think a country that declares or says that we trust in God, or God is the one that we trust, but the things that we do are so contrary to it, I think it shows that there are a lot of people that the trust is really in the authority that was established by a greater authority, God. We put our trust in government rather than God, and it's shaping the things that people think or people think that are right. And it is bringing a lot of, consequences. It's bringing destruction to our country, to our civilization, because God has created a way and given a foundation upon which to build something that will be strong and last and bring blessing to those that are a part of it. And when it's done contrary to that, then we see the demise. We see all of these different things. And instead of turning back to the God that we have offended by choosing to do things our own way, we continue to try to add different layers on how we can even bring, do these things and still continue to move forward instead of turning back to him.
I think if we were looking at what's happened societally, it's about as ludicrous to think it happened accidentally as to believe in evolution. I mean, you have to believe an awful lot of nonsense to believe that out of an amoeba came any life form, like any mammal or the human being. So it has to have been a deliberate act. So who wants to attack the family and chooses the main target, the bullseye, to be the father?
It's the enemy. I think we can go back to, the beginning of the Bible and go back to Genesis. It's almost like God establishes an order. He created a man. He gave the commandments to the man. And from that man, he brought a woman that was made from the man. And then here comes in the midst of, the beautiful garden where everything they need, could wish for or want is there. And he does have the one tree that he says that they're not to eat of, and it's the tree of good and evil. And even as we look at that, it says, why would God do that? But God wanted a relationship with us, and a relationship is a two-way street. And then here comes the deceiver. Here comes the enemy. And, he comes to deceive the woman. The man happened to actually be right there, and he failed to step up and to be the man that he was. And when that came and they ate of that fruit and they fell away from God, then that began, an alienation with God and a separation from him, but an alienation with one another, and one that to this day that still impacts, our world, and it impacts our family, and it impacts our relationships. And the only one who can bring restoration to that is the second Adam that God sent, and that was Jesus Christ, the one who obeyed God fully and the one who actually died on a tree and shed his blood in order to reconcile us back to God, that we could have a relationship with him. But the enemy, it's like, he wants to get, if I want, the family to be out of place, I'm going to come and I'm going to challenge the authority, of the man. I'm going to get him not to, step into the place that he was called and ordained to step in. Because when he hits that, then everything else falls out of order.
And that's why I go back to early television. Early television made a mockery of marriage. It made a mockery of fathers. And it actually set the stage to have women resonate with the feminist movement, because all the mother did was sit around and try to figure out what to do to make herself important. And so we had zany housewives, and we had dumb fathers who didn't know what was going on. And in actual fact, I believe that was a propaganda move. It was a new medium. Television was new. People were going to go, we're going to watch it. and they didn't look at it critically. And sadly, because so much of the culture had moved away from a biblical base, they had nothing to judge it on.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I just think, also what's one of the names that they use for Satan, for the one who's the enemy of God and the enemy of humanity? It's the prince of the power of the air. So how does he propagate his message? His message, which is anti-God, which is anti-God's design, anti-family, anti-marriage, anti-kids. He's going to bring it through the mediums of mediums of television and radio, and now the World Wide Web and social media. He's going to propagate his message and create all of these distortions of what it means, for young men to be a man, or a young woman to be a woman, or the fact that nowadays it's not even man or woman. It's, you decide what you are, instead of realizing that there's a God who from the beginning created male and female. And, God hasn't changed. And what causes us to think differently is sin. It's sin which has, it's darkened our mind. It's darkened our hearts. It causes us to think contrary to God. And Satan wants us to continue to give in to those, desires of our flesh that go contrary to God. So he constantly pumps his messages and pumps his messages and pumps his messages. And that's why as the church, we have to unapologetically stand on the word of God, stand on what God says when it comes to marriage and family and male and female and sex. Because if we're not, then we got a generation that are growing up and, constantly hearing that. And oftentimes, sadly, the church is either silent or we've actually gone the wrong way. And we're, in agreement with things that are contrary to the authoritative word of God.
Yeah. And, when you reject the biblical model of the husband being the head and the covering and protection for the woman, and you convince people that it's an insult for a man to open a door for you, or it's an insult for him to stand up and say, would you like my seat? You sort of force people into a position that, and I know this to be true in a number of cases, a lot of women got pregnant and never told the father of their child that there was a baby. Yep. Now, we could say, poor dad, he never got a chance to say no. But again, they had engaged in activity that they had to know could produce a child, right? And so how many men are walking around today having failed to do their part for their offspring, but don't even know they have offspring?
I think there's a lot. One of the things that I do is I lead Bible studies for men that have been impacted by abortion. And there have been a few where it's been a number of years before they found out that they, in fact, were a father, but they walked around for years not knowing. And I think that happens quite often. But you did hit on something that I think is very powerful, because I will have some of those men and their only response is like great anger towards the woman. Like, how in the world could she ever choose to do that and not inform me? And in and of themselves, they can come across almost feeling like I'm the victim. I'm innocent. I didn't have any part to play. But you mentioned something that, they got there a certain way. And most of these guys, they weren't married to the woman. They were having sex outside of what God designed. And as a result of that, she ended up pregnant. And so in some regards, it's like her being left to the place where she has to make this choice. Yes, it was wrong that she did not inform you that you were, in fact, the dad, or give you the opportunity to speak up for the life of your child. Yes, that's not right. But the very fact that she found herself in that place was because as a man, we failed to do what we should have done. Like, as men, if we're going to be men, then we need to, I think a real man honors God. And so a real man is going to honor God's design. He's going to honor women. He's not going to use women as an object for his pleasure. He's going to honor a woman. If I'm going to honor a woman and hold her up with dignity and value, then I am not going to use her in that way or, lay down to have sex with her until we are in a committed relationship where she knows I'm committed to her, because before God, we have said that this is, a relationship we're coming into till death do us part. And when we lose that first part, we end up with a lot of sad situations where there are men who are walking around, but yet those men, had they been men, then that situation would have never occurred. And so, it's a whole cycle that goes, but I think you're right. And, I think whether or not a man knows that he was, he was the dad of a baby that never had the opportunity to be born because an abortion happened. I think there's something that still deeply breaks in the heart of man, because I think even abortion, even though it's a physical act, I think it's spiritual. And the fact that, here's a child that God is knitting together. There's a connection that man and that baby and that child has. And I think there's something in a man that breaks because there weren't things that he was able to do, even though he may not have known about it. So I think there's a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, and there's just a lot of situations that could have been avoided if we go back just to the place that we put those stigmas in place, like sex outside of marriage. It isn't right. A woman getting pregnant outside of it, that's not the right way. But once that happens, we want to walk with them through that, and help them to hopefully be restored to a point where they won't continue in this behavior, but they will see that there's a God who has a better way, who, who's given his life for me. So my life can be changed and different. So I can do things and avoid some of these things that I've come into.
I think of the passage where it says that someone who does not provide for his own is worse than an infidel. And so for a man, if he does not know if a casual relationship, a one night stand, whatever it is, suddenly the girl disappeared or whatever it is, or he paid for the abortion or encouraged it, the Bible says he's worse than an infidel because he didn't provide for that child.
I think you're right. And I think there's some things instinctively God has put into a man. God's put into a man to be a provider. God's put into a man to be a protector. God has instinctively, made men to be a part of the procreation process, whether we're acknowledged or not in it. Men instinctively love, pleasure, and men want to perform. And oftentimes that's in work. But for an abortion, I think all five of those things are hit. They didn't, regardless of why the decision was made for an abortion, the man didn't have the opportunity to provide or protect, whether he pushed for it, whether he didn't know about it. That wasn't there. The procreation process that he was a part of from the very beginning ends in a tragic fail. It ends in the loss of his child and the death of his preborn child. And something that was pleasurable, an act of sexual act, can become very painful. And his performance, when he looks at that, is a tragic fail. And so there's a lot that happens. But yeah, I think what you said is absolutely right. When somebody doesn't provide, they're worse than an infidel. And in our culture, that's something that's hard to say, but I think it's absolutely true. It's like, we're failing to provide. One, because we've bought into the lie that this isn't a life that's to be provided for, but it is a life. One, from the very beginning, from the fertilization of that sperm with that egg that becomes a one-cell organism, a zygote, which has everything there for every stage of human development, and then begins this process of multiplication into 100 trillion cell adult. But everything that's needed for every stage of the development of that child is absolutely there at that time. And so that is life that is growing into the fullness of everything that it will be. But we have so cheapened that for a lot of, men and a lot of women, it doesn't cause some of those things instinctively that even God has put in us to be challenged, or for us to be, confronted to raise up to a higher standard instead of being lowered down into, what the world has drug us into, which has led to a lot of death and a lot of depravity in our world and in our culture.
Indeed. And it's interesting, David, that God, obviously being the creator, understood and worked into human beings sexual attraction.
Yeah.
All right. When Adam saw Eve, he wasn't saying, wow, now I have someone to cook breakfast. That came along with it, maybe, but he was no doubt aroused. And so that's a good thing. Without it, there would not be children. Okay. Yeah. But the Bible, specifically God's law, had a provision that before you would marry someone, the man was to produce a dowry to demonstrate not only that he could provide for her and children should they come, but that he was serious. And although the Bible doesn't specify how much that was, I've read various things that said it was customarily about 3 years of wages. We do know that Jacob worked 7 years for Rachel, except it turned out to be 14 years because he got a fast one there, right? So it's this idea that not that you're buying a woman, you're demonstrating faithfulness in advance, right? And so that would be a deterrent for fornication outside of marriage, because the law also provided that the father, after the two had come together, could say, nope, you can't marry my daughter, but you owe the dowry. So there was a financial consideration to go ahead and move the ancient boundaries. And now we have a governmental system that's more than happy to move the dad out of the way and even pay for the abortion with taxpayer funds. So we see that this whole statist mentality was really meant to push out fathers, and in the process convince them that it's a woman's problem, it's not a man's.
Yeah, even taking that further, Andrea, not only to pay for it if she chooses to have an abortion, but whether it's through the welfare system or some other system, which goes against marriage as well. So it's almost as if we'll continue to provide for you and your kids, as many kids as you want to have, or if you don't want to have them, we'll pay for the abortion. But it kind of acts as the man out, makes him feel like you don't necessarily need a man, and you can move ahead on your own. And it's just left a culture of kids that are growing up in fatherlessness, and just some of the symptoms from that are astounding. And some of the pain that we are experiencing from one generation to the next is just being perpetuated because, yeah, you're right. Men aren't being called to step up, and someone else will step up and take their place, and feel free to raise up your kids and through the public schools and teach them all manner of things when it comes to what is marriage, what is gender, what is sex. So all these things, instead of being taught by a dad who's been moved out of the way, who is given the charge by God to bring up his children in the fear and in the instruction of the Lord, he's been moved out of the way. And now you got the government stepping in, and they'll not only give money, but they will also point this child, instead of bringing them up in the Lord, they will point them to ways that are contrary to the Lord. And it just caused the ripple effect of what we see from one generation to the next to be even more devastating as we kind of continue to go down this slippery slope that we're on.
Yeah, I often quote the second commandment that says, visiting the iniquity of the fathers unto the children to the third and fourth generation. Well, you see that played out. Fatherless homes produce fatherless homes. Girls who have abortions 40, 50 years ago tell their daughters and their granddaughters, it's no big deal. I had it, and look, I still have a happy life, which is questionable, right? So when it comes right down to it, if you do it other than God's way, it's going to be tragic. And you have to wonder, and in the news recently, we hear about riots and in various inner cities, or police acting in a way that nobody would ever have considered it likely that a policeman would act 100 years ago. And you have to wonder, and I don't think a study will ever be done, but there are studies. How many of these people are fatherless? How many of these people never had to worry that if I step out of line, my father's going to knock me upside the head, even if he does all sorts of things that they didn't have a reverence and fear for a father because he was absent. There was nobody to fear.
No, I think you're right. I think that contributes in more than we know in various situations as we look around. Like no dad being there, it does. It changes the way that, you think. I think God puts fathers there to love their children, to bring them up, to be an example, but also to help them to know those boundaries that are there that you're not to cross. And so without that being there, I think, generation grows up and they've been crossing the boundaries all their life. They've been crossing it as kids. And even in crossing the boundaries, they're being reinforced by society that it's okay to cross the boundaries. And so then you get in situations where there are rules and there are regulations and there are ways that you are supposed to be. Well, you've been living your whole life, whereas if like I can pretty much, it's almost like the days of Judges, like there was no king and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And so it's like, and now you got those people that have lived that way for so long. And then all of a sudden it's like, now you're supposed to abide by some rules or some codes of conduct. But I've lived my life just kind of doing what I've wanted. And you said that's okay, a good way for me to express myself. And so I think it does lead to some atrocities that we see in our world. But there's I think there's a lot of different things. I think, I'm Black, which Andrea, but I think even in the Black community, I think there's been a lot of things that have affected fatherhood. Even as I think back to, like slavery and I think of men who were, who would have sex with many women and who would be forced to have sex with many women in order to produce a labor force for the slave master. And so families were torn apart. Husbands and wives were torn apart. Husbands were torn apart from their kids. And so this went on for hundreds of years. And so I think some of that, there are mindsets that have happened. And I think some of that are things that are hard to break. And I think the only one who can change that, who can restore that is God, is us as a nation turning away from God. And yet, as a nation, we seem to be falling further and further away. And I think it just accentuates things that have been cycles, sin cycles, generational cycles that continue just to reverberate and continue to have just a huge impact in our culture and in our society.
Yes. Now, just in case anybody listening says, who is this David Williams that he should tell us what we should think or do? And let's get into your story, because not only do you have a principled approach to what you're talking about, and we've heard that, starting with the scripture and what does God say, but you have experiences, as I have mentioned, on all sides of this fatherhood issue, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you want to put it that way. So share with my listeners your story.
Yeah. So, if I go back to my own childhood, I had a dad who was in the home for my first 11 years, but the picture I got from my dad was one that probably it caused me to look at marriage and sex and family very differently than what I've talked about in the first part of our conversation. My dad had been married once, had 6 kids, and was divorced and married my mom. And I grew up watching my dad curse my mom out to the point of tears many days. I never saw my dad hug my mom, kiss my mom, never heard my dad tell my mom he loved her. My dad was verbally abusive to my brother and I, at times physically abusive to us. I saw my dad as a little boy out at bars, flirting with other women. I see my dad leave these bars and go to a friend's house and go into rooms and have sex with these women. My dad would allow my brother and I, while he was doing that, to look at pornographic magazines. And when my dad would leave from these places and we'd be driving home to go to my mom, and they were still married at the time, he'd say stuff like this to my brother and I: never let your wife know everything you have. Never let her know everything you do. Always keep a spare woman on the side, and always keep spare money on the side. So I had a very, very distorted view of fatherhood and marriage and sex. And my mom and dad divorced when I was 11. And actually, I thought it was the best of times and the worst of times. Best of times because I didn't have to worry about my dad treating my mom the way he did, or my brother and I. But the worst of times because I really did love my dad. Man, there's candy and food that I ate today because my dad ate it. TV shows I'll stop as I'm turning through the TV because my dad watched them. Like, I had a great affinity for my dad's love. And my dad, after that, wasn't around a whole lot. I'd see him maybe once a month, but it wasn't really about my brother and I when we were together. He was hanging out with his friends and doing his thing. So I always felt like, even when I was with my dad, I was probably more of a burden or a hindrance than him just wanting to be around me. And then, once my mom and dad divorced, my mom got in a relationship with a guy, and this guy happened to be married and had 5 kids, and he was in a sexual relationship with my mom, and he was the minister of music at a church. And so this caused my view of even God to be distorted, and marriage and sex and family. And so that was kind of what I grew up watching. And some of the things you mentioned, like TV, movies, magazines, my friends, that became what I would think about sex, was what I learned from them. And, I was watching stuff where, sex was common in movies and TV shows, and my friends were having sex. And so that was like what was kind of expected, or I thought was expected of me, as a man. And so I ended up, growing up, never having sex with a young lady until I went off to college. But even though that wasn't the case, man, the way that I thought of women, the way that I thought of sex, the way that I thought of marriage, I actually thought sex was better for a man to have with a woman who he wasn't married with, because of things I saw with my dad, or things I saw with this man with my mom, or things my friends told me. That was kind of the image I had of sex. And that a man was, my dad would always say things like this, even though he wasn't there. He was like, I give you guys money. You got a roof over your head. So I thought at best a man was just to give money, provide for his kid, make sure they have what they need. He didn't need to be around. So that was kind of my picture. Went off to college, and I had gone to church for years, but didn't see God as being relevant. And I thought that my college education would, be what propelled me to success in my future. And so I had 2 goals. I was going to get a college degree, and the other goal was I was going to have fun along the way. And part of having fun, sadly, was I was going to have sex with a young lady. And that happened my second year of college, sophomore in college, get in a relationship with a young lady and think that I love her and she loves me. And then she comes back to me with words that she's pregnant, and I wasn't ready to hear that. And from growing up, I didn't feel like I knew what it meant to be a dad, knew what it meant to be a husband. I wanted to get my college degree, and I saw her pregnancy as an impediment to that. And so with those things in my mind, I went to her and said the best thing for us to do would be to have an abortion. She seemed to agree, but she asked me a question every day for weeks. David, you think this is the right thing to do? And I would come back and say yes. And the day she was going to have the abortion, I wasn't even with her. We were in different cities. Her mom takes her to have the abortion. And she asked me the same question that day. And very hesitantly, I said yes. And she had an abortion, and it was traumatic for her. Talked to her later that evening. She was absolutely traumatized by what had happened to her. But I thought in a short time she'd get over it. I'd get over it. We'd move ahead. But there was a lot of guilt and a lot of shame that came upon me. One, I didn't, a woman that I said that I loved, I didn't protect her from this pain and trauma that she went through. 2, I knew that it wasn't just a blob of tissue, even though I wasn't a Christian and I wasn't following God. I knew that I had kind of made the decision for my own life and dreams and plans above the life of a child. So there was great guilt and pain that came upon me. And yet I never thought about turning back to the God I heard about as a kid. And some of that was because I saw people that claimed to know him and loved him, and their life didn't look much different than mine. So I didn't think he could make a difference, or his forgiveness would do anything, or he would be able to change my life. So I just continued to live the way that I live. I medicated my pain by sleeping with more women, drinking alcohol to the point of, wanting to not think about some of the things that I had done. I became very angry, very depressed. I had an unhealthy drive to finish my college education, I think because of the fact of the decision that I made and not providing for the child that I should have, or even honoring my girlfriend in a way that I should have. And these things just continued for a long time. And it was a number of years that kind of walked through that. Ended up going through another unplanned pregnancy. And this time didn't want to, experience some of the things I did in the past, and decided to marry this young lady. And it wasn't because I loved her or I was now pro-life. It was in some regards, I was going to make up for what I had done wrong before. And I put a ring on her finger, but it didn't change anything about me. the things that I saw that my dad did to my mom were the very things that I was doing to my wife. I was very angry, going back to school to get another degree because my first degree didn't fix my life. I thought another degree would. My son was born. I couldn't bond with him, and ended up going through a divorce. And it just happened that over a course of time, through some men and people God put in my life, the Lord opened my eyes to the reality of his love and his forgiveness and his healing. And he began to transform me. But you're listening to a man who didn't understand God's plan for sex, for marriage, for family, who trifled these things, which has led to the death of my own child. And I was involved in a wicked, heinous, evil act. And the only way that I can say that is because I know that the forgiveness of God is even greater than the wrong that I've done. But God began to transform me. And so, those out there who saying, how can this guy say to me these things? Like, I'm guilty of all the things that I talked about before. I know the forgiveness of God. I know a life that's been transformed by his grace. He's changed me from a perspective and a way that I lived that led to death in so many areas. And he's brought me to know him, the source of life. And now I realize that his commandments and his word is the way to life. And it's brought great blessing to my life. I remarried. I've been married for 21 years. God has blessed my wife and I with 6 kids. And so a man who didn't even provide or protect for his first child, God has given me the awesome privilege to be able to raise up my 6 kids in my home in the fear and in the admonition of the Lord. My older son, who is 28, we have a pretty decent relationship, and I've been able to speak into his life and watch, and we have a relationship where we, are pretty close. And he is actually living a life in spite of his dad even not being there, which is pretty honoring to God. And so what I've learned through my faltering, through my failures, through my sin, is that way brought a lot of pain, a lot of destruction, a lot of hurt to my life. And what I found in God is a restoration, a healing, a forgiveness, and a way where he has brought peace and joy to my life in spite of some of those things that I've gone through. And so a lot of my heart, Andrea, is that especially for a young generation, I don't want them to be decimated by the things that the world says this is the way you're supposed to live and the way that you're supposed to go. And their lives are being utterly decimated because they're going in a way contrary to God that leads to death. That my heart, as God has restored my life, is to be a part of speaking into this generation and calling them into something that is far greater, far better, and the only way to life. And that's through God's Son, Jesus Christ.
Amen to that. And the second portion of the second commandment is, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. And your testimony, David, is one of God's mercy. And as you gave your story that night, I listened to it, and your wife was sitting in the audience. I was in a position to watch her face, right? I was listening to you, but I was watching her.
Yeah.
And you were honest about the fact that all the bad things that you considered were part of a personality that led to things didn't immediately go away when you were converted, but that what sustained both of you through that period was marriage. It wasn't magic. It was marriage.
Yeah.
And so, I find your testimony not only credible, but I can see that, there are a lot of people who no doubt have secrets, whether it's past secrets of maybe they fathered a child, maybe they didn't, or maybe there were a woman who had an abortion but never told anybody. That your message is clearly one of redemption and restoration and reconciliation with God, and that your motives are not anything other than using your life as a way to help others, much the same way Paul the Apostle had to admit, and readily admitted, he was busy killing Christians, imprisoning Christians. And so that made him all the more dangerous to the enemies of God, because he could speak the language of those who decided they didn't care. And I think you can speak that language.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, there's so many people, regardless of the things that they face in their story or the things that are similar to what I went through. I think all of us recognize that there are, things that have hurt us deeply, things that we regret, things that we carry around with guilt and with shame. And I think that what the Lord has shown me, that as he has brought, a measure of redemption, and every day that gets greater, and healing and forgiveness, I experience it more. But people need to realize that God is one who can do that. And I think sometimes it's almost like we want people to walk away more impressed with us than with God. Mm-hmm. And so God is the one who saved me. God is the one who's transformed me. God is the one who has healed me and brought restoration to my life. And people need to see him. And sometimes the only way that they can get a glimpse of just how great and gracious he is by us being willing to share, here's a hard area of brokenness in my past. Here's a hard area where I failed and I sinned greatly. But I also want you to see at the same time that God's grace is so much greater than our sin. And I think it causes people to, people that may be even hostile to the gospel. Like I've had people, Andrea, who I'll go and I'll speak to a college group, and usually I do retreats. And the first night of the retreat, I open up with my testimony. So I'll share with them my story. Mm-hmm. I've had young men come up to me who said, David, now that you have opened up your life to us and you have shared with us what you were like and what God has done for you, I don't know what you're going to say for the rest of this weekend, but my ears are open to hear what you have to say. Wow. And you know what that allows me to do? That allows me to be able to speak some hard truths from God's word, the hard truths in the midst of our culture, because people see that I'm not one who's out with a motive to rain down condemnation. I'm one who has condemned myself because of my sin, who has been saved greatly by Jesus. And my heart in sharing with you the truth about what God's word says about these things is so that you too can come out of condemnation, that you too can come into freedom, that you too can experience God's love and God's forgiveness. And so, that has really afforded us a lot. You mentioned our marriage, but I think even more greatly for my wife and I, it's been God given us a heart for him, that we want to, walk intimately with him. And that intimacy that we have with him, it overflows into our marriage, and it allows us to be able to forgive each other, even as Jesus has forgiven us, for hard things that we have done. Indeed. If you want practice in forgiving and being forgiven, marriage is the great place to do it, because, those forgive us our trespasses. Well, count on the fact that if you spend 24/7 with someone, there will be some trespasses inevitably. Yep. And that's the grace of God that we get to show to each other. Amen. All right. So there are going to be people saying, how do I find out more about this guy? Where does he speak? Or how can I get him to be a speaker to our group? So share with my listeners. How do they get in touch with you? How do they find you? How do they look at some of the stuff you've already produced? Yeah, you can go to, I have a website, which is davidwilliamsspeaks.com. I also have a number of videos on YouTube, and I think it's David Williams Speaks 1 is the channel. So those are the two primary ways. There's some other ways, but you can get those other ways off of the website. Very good. Well, I thank you for your time. We had planned this a couple of months ago, I think, but through other circumstances, today was the day that God chose that we get a chance to talk. And I'm grateful for your work and your testimony. And I know, not only do I hope, but I know that this will be a blessing to others. Thank you, Andrea, so much. Thank you for what you're doing and the opportunity to be able to share today. And listeners, as always, if you want to comment on this or other podcasts or some suggestions for future guests, you can reach me at outofthequestionpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to Out of the Question. For more information on this and other topics, please visit chalcedon.edu.